She came into my room from the balcony. I entered with ease because the balcony can be opened both from the inside and from the outside. When this crazy woman saw only the compote, she was clearly disappointed. Apparently, she was counting on a third helping. After hesitating a little, she took the compote and drank it. Putting the cup down, she walked back across the balcony with the empty cutlery. I followed her. She turned the corner and entered the 7th ward. Leaving the plate and fork on the table, she went out into the corridor and slammed the door. I decided to go find out. When I approached her from the corridor, I, of course, did not find anyone. There were no instruments either. There were no things in the room at all. Then I ran back into the corridor and came across a nurse. "Oh, what are you doing there?" She turned to me in surprise. "You don't know who lies in this room? Because I saw a woman here. I didn't go into details." "How? Can't be. 3 days ago, a woman died here and no one else was settled here." "That is?" I hatched. "How come they didn't check in? I saw a woman here. She came here 3 minutes ago. This one, in a blue robe." "Can't be." She led me into the hall. There I saw something. There was a portrait of that same woman hanging on the wall. There were flowers. "And what did she die from?" "Already gloomy," I asked the nurse. "It's ridiculous. I ate pasta and choked, so much so that I suffocated. She was found about 20 minutes later in front of the plate, but she had almost recovered. There was 1 day before discharge." With these words, she sighed sadly and left. Then everything became clear to me. I stayed in the hospital for a couple more days and was discharged. I returned home. Everything was the same as before, but I couldn't get this incident out of my head. I still can't calmly eat pasta. And after this, how can you not believe in mysticism? To be honest, I even like it. These views calm me down. It makes me feel so comfortable. But this is at first. And then I remember these events. I don't know why, but they constantly pop up in my head like I'm not impressionable, but this is what happens. Something carried me away. I arrived normally and immediately went to my place of work. Expectations were not particularly sky high, an ordinary hospital without privileges and so on. And so it happened. I was greeted by a white building. It looked, surprisingly, very good. I went inside. A man immediately came running to me. For some reason, I thought that he was a pathologist, although it turned out he was a nurse, which confused me very much. They took me to the 4th floor to introduce me to the head doctor. It turned out to be a young, pretty girl whom I eventually married. We even had a son. He is now 15. Our family is the same as that of my parents, strong and also without conflicts. By the way, she later told me that she was not the head doctor. She just pretended that she was in charge. But in reality, this guy worked from home who gave her commands. I know it's strange, but what can you do? People. She began to explain everything to me very quickly, to be honest. Then I didn't understand anything, but stupidly assented, but what should I do? There were no more options, so I just didn't care about everything. The main thing was work. I left my things in the office and began to examine the patients in the wards. The first patient was Mikhail Alexandrovich Grotskovich, brain pathology. He was predicted to die soon. I quickly examined him. It was clear that he was slowly going to his forefathers, but we could not do anything. I gave him some medicine and moved on. I checked 6 patients whose condition was not as dire as that of Mikhail Alexandrovich. Since it was evening, I went to the office, filled out various pieces of paper, and went to bed. The clock said 22:56. In the morning, I checked all the patients again. Everyone was fine, but not Grotskovich. He somehow turned over on his stomach and pulled out all the tubes, even from the IV. I quickly turned him over and put an IV in him, but he wasn't breathing. I ran for other doctors who took him to the operating room. The whole hospital was on ears. It turned out that Mikhail Alexandrovich is a fairly well-known person here, since he has been lying here for 5 years, no less, but always in the same condition, on the verge of death. Some patients said that when you are lying in this hospital, this man constantly appears in your dreams. No matter the nightmare or not, he will always be there. And almost always he scares the crap out of everyone, so that the whole hospital screams as if they were giving birth to two people at once. He himself is always calm, does not talk to anyone, only eats and silently takes medicine. He apparently had no relatives, nor any friends, nor anyone else who could visit him. Once, in the ward next to his, a patient almost jumped out the window because of a dream in which this old man appeared. By the way, I haven't seen dreams for a long time, so I've never had such problems with his appearance in dreams. In general, I worked like this for a week. Nothing supernatural happened. But then, one night, when I left my office, my door did not want to open, as if something was propping it up on the other side. I didn't have any special strength, so I called the guard from the window. I saw him smoking and asked him to open the door for me. When he came to the door, I heard his scream and footsteps leaving the door. To be honest, I was taken aback by his scream, or rather, from surprise. About 10 minutes later, the police arrived. It turned out that right next to my office lay the corpse of a patient from Ward 8 or 9. A young guy smashed his head on the door of the ward and died near mine. Nobody, I don't know how this happened because the wards are closed at night and only the security guard has the keys. And how did he get to my office if it was on the opposite side of a long floor and the guy himself had a broken skull? There were no motives either. In the hospital, they treated him normally. They even seemed to be friends from among the patients. His condition was good. He would have been out in a week or two, and that's all, but here it is. In general, according to the official version, he smashed his head on the door as it began to hurt unbearably, and after that he decided to go and get help from me. But this version did not answer the questions of why the ward was not closed and why my office did not open. The guy was small. Even I would have opened the door that was propped up by his carcass. After a month of work, everything was forgotten, but in vain. One patient, during the day, tried to kill Mikhail Alexandrovich, to suffocate him with a pillow, as in various films. Fortunately, the doctors managed to stop him. He was supposed to be discharged that day, but then, it seems, he was imprisoned. One day, I needed to go to another city, and I needed to help my brother with some matters, apparently very important. Then, as I was told, Grotzkevich, one night, ran throughout the hospital like Hermes in walking boots, shouting something, breaking into cells, and so on. They calmed him down, as it turned out. The grandfather noticed something on the street and wanted to help by knocking on the cells of other patients. And there was a robbery there. A young girl was robbed by two unknown people and ran away. But what made me quit happened in the winter. On my birthday, after a modest celebration in the office, I went to bed. But suddenly, I heard the sound of the lock closing on my door. I rushed to it and tried to open it. It didn't work. I tried to insert the key. It didn't work either, but I didn't have enough strength to knock it out. And then I heard a cry of fear from one of the patients and the sound of the door of the nearest room being knocked down. I then frantically called through the window for help, but no one responded. Then I heard the sounds of hitting either the wall or something else, mixed with crying and laughter. The laughter apparently belonged to Grotzkevich. When the first person fell silent, the second door opened, and the sound of breaking glass, as if someone had been thrown out of there. And so the doors opened. Sounds of struggle were heard, glass breaking, just plaintive screams and constant laughter, which was similar to the accelerated and distorted laughter of Santa Claus. Suddenly, I heard the sounds of the bug of several people. All the doctors and orderlies came running towards the sounds, although it was a little late. And suddenly, several female and male screams appeared, which died down almost at the same moment, all at once. At that moment, everything died down, even the laughter. There was a knock on my door, calmly, unobtrusively, and a few seconds later, it was as if they were trying to break down my door with a battering ram. Although she was made of iron, she was shocked. With the next blow, he knocked down the door. I was not mistaken. It was Mikhail Alexandrovich Grodzkevich, only covered in blood and other human flesh. He screamed and jumped out the window. Only in the next second did I realize that I had jumped from the fourth fucking floor and was about to die. But I fell on a soft snowdrift. I looked up. This bastard was looking at me and laughing, and then he jumped down after me. Only he landed not so softly, but on the asphalt. I didn't check how he was doing. I just ran wherever I could, and ran as if I was the fastest person in the world. I ran to the police station where I told everything. They gave me some clothes and food, and they themselves sent there, according to them, a considerable crowd of brave defenders of order. In the morning, it turned out that that scum had crashed on the asphalt. I even felt funny. I could knock down doors, I could kill a crowd with a click, but I died on the asphalt. I was also told about the fate of my future wife, whom we were dating then. It turned out that she left earlier than the others, so she didn't experience that nightmare. In general, I signed several papers and went to live with her. So what is next? What's next? Well, I got married, bought a car, a dacha, took my son to school, and so on. This story was told to me by an almost casual acquaintance, a short-term girlfriend, who unselfishly spent literally a few hours with me. Natasha, let's call this girl that, worked as a nurse in a not very cheerful institution, in a children's intensive care unit. That is, the intensive care unit is generally far from an optimistic institution, let alone a children's. Children are brought in, mostly useless, abandoned, brought to the last stage of exhaustion. These children are on IVs and on artificial respiration machines. Maybe they will recover and be able to continue to live. Well, at least live a little. The laws in this regard are very strict, until complex rules are followed, until children spend a certain number of days and hours under an IV, on machines breathing for them. These machines cannot be turned off. This is an expensive matter, even very expensive, and even more expensive are the drugs that are injected into the veins of known corpses, but the state covers this expense. God forbid resuscitators violate the instructions. If they violate it, they can be accused of almost murder, and it's cheaper for yourself to strictly follow even the most idiotic instructions. So, in the intensive care unit next to living children, there are creatures from whose wounds blood has not been oozing for a long time, on whose skin corpse-like spots appear, and in the pierced heads you can see what the brain is turned into. I won't describe in detail, but this substance turns green. Is that enough already? So, as a rule, already known corpses are taken to the stairs, even with the corresponding smell. Why on the stairs? But because it was the stairs that were adapted for a kind of intermediate branch of the morgue. It's a bit far from the morgue itself, and when the time comes to remove the long-standing and obviously dead person from the apparatus, the child's arms and legs are tied and taken to the stairs. It's very cold there. The place is quite suitable for a morgue. And in the morning, the creature, who was so unlucky, is taken to a real morgue. On the other hand, sometimes a living child ends up on the stairs. It also happens by accident that they mistake him for a dead person and carry him away without following all the instructions, because the drugs and equipment are still very expensive. But it happens completely differently. Let's say they bring in a monstrously malnourished child, a girl, 3 months old. There were monstrous ulcers all over the body because the drunken mother dragged the child to beg, but did not consider it necessary to change the diaper. She always had more important things to do. Yes, and they served more if the child cries more pitifully and the crippled body is visible. Good people don't really understand where their compassionate donations will go. But here the mother could not protect herself, and even in a quiet town with a population of less than 100,000 people, where there is little transport and cars drive slowly, she managed to become a victim of a traffic accident. She herself, the mother, was crushed by a truck into the wall of the house and turned into a pile of meat and bones. Do you feel sorry for her? If you are not being hypocritical, then it's unlikely. And the child with terrible injuries ended up not immediately in the morgue, but in the children's intensive care unit. And a few hours later, the child died, which, again, if we are not being hypocritical, is also for the best. Violating any and all instructions, the doctors began to remove the baby from the machine, remove the IV, and then crying was heard. The child weakly rolled up his legs. Now let's assess the situation. It's the dead of night. No one will ever check anything. A child conceived while drunk, born into the world for unknown reasons. A child who would not have grown up mentally normal in any case. A girl who, if she survives, will have to have both of her crushed arms amputated. The reader has the right to have his own opinion on this matter, but I am sure that the doctors made the right decision by tying the arms and legs of the still moving creature and taking him to the stairs. It's cruel? No more than life is cruel, and no more cruel than dooming a child to continue to exist as an almost retarded, hereditary alcoholic without both arms. Is this immoral? Maybe. But the creature's arms and legs were knitted and carried up the icy stairs by women, most of whom had children of their own. I do not undertake to be more moral than mothers if they decide that it is better for this 3-month-old creature not to remain in this world. Natasha, telling about this episode of her work activity, said, "They say that all resuscitators will immediately go to hell after death. And those on duty in the intensive care unit at night often drink alcohol, and I suspect that this is not just a matter of a little pleasure in entertainment on a boring duty and not only in snow warming. The fact is that a long vaulted corridor leads to the intensive care room, into which no windows or doors open. You just have to walk about 15 meters along this long corridor, unlit at night, connecting the intensive care unit and the rest of the clinic, and sometimes steps are heard in this corridor. Maybe this is the chief doctor checking you. Wants to know if you drink at work or behave morally?" Natasha laughs coquettishly. Sometimes a doctor comes in. You can hear him immediately as soon as he steps into the corridor, which is why his checks are not carried out. Rashni, let him check for himself. While he is walking, we will remove the bottle 100 times. No, these are completely different steps. They are deaf, quiet. Sometimes you even think, maybe I'm imagining this? Or maybe it's true. No, these steps are heard by several people at once. It even happens that you say to someone, they say, "Do you hear footsteps?" And your girlfriend hears it herself, regardless of you. So here. And these steps are not only quiet, muffled. You see, they are different. Sometimes, thump, thump, thump. It's like a baby running about 3 years old. Sometimes it's like being 7 years old. In general, like those who visited you, clients, so to speak. Yes, like those who have visited. But there is no direct connection. I'll tell you right away. It cannot be said that whoever has visited is the one who can hear his footsteps. Do the steps lead to intensive care? Well, there is news, but it never happens that they bring it. And so the footsteps in the corridor fade away. Everything is quieter, quieter. And the end, you can't hear them at all. As I understand, these steps are never connected with the doctor's steps. You understand correctly. The doctor is a doctor, and these steps are steps. Steps appear. Steps end, on their own. The doctor has nothing to do with it, and if we carry someone, well, we carry them up the stairs. These are also different steps. And has no one ever tried to look into the corridor? Hey. Natasha has already taken a fair amount of white martini. This is beginning to affect her behavior. Now she props up her disheveled head with her hands, pokes her pupils into my pupils, and breaks into a frankly drunken smile. "So you come to us and go out into the corridor, take a walk towards the steps." No, but sounds are sounds, but really you didn't see anything. Nope, steps are enough for us. I later returned to these steps on the stairs again when we were already parting, but I didn't learn anything new. Either Natasha didn't want to talk, or she herself didn't know anything other than what was told. And I'm sorry. I won't tell you her real name and the city in which steps are heard in the corridor, but I suspect that something similar can be found in intensive care units in other cities, and not only in Siberia, of course. Here, https://jutco.ru/shaggy-v-corridor, the most terrible stories from life. Last January, I was hospitalized with a broken spine and a couple of other injuries. No surgery was required, but I had to lie in one place for a month. Imagine. Breathing is painful and unpleasant because the ribs are broken and the lungs are bruised. Moving your legs is even more painful. Every awkward movement radiates wild pain in the spine. The painkiller helped, but its composition. They said it was analgin with diphenhydramine and God knows what else. And getting used to this stuff was terrible. My grandfather was lying next to me, and when they stopped injecting him with painkillers, he was writhing in pain. He was lying with a complex fracture of his left leg, and his head was hurting. This grandfather was the only one who left the room alive in my presence. Over the course of a month, 6 more people were put in my ward, but all died. One of them had multiple stab wounds when he arrived at the hospital, so his death was natural. But men with hernias and fractures died for unknown reasons. Naturally, no one told me the cause of death, and this made me a little scared. Grandfather said that at night someone walks as if on heels, not with a shuffle but with a knock, and that sometimes the rumble of a gurney can be heard. You cannot imagine how I felt when the corpses were taken out of the ward in the morning. Then I learned from the technician that people here were dying like flies before me, and in general, the ward was not good. A week after I was admitted to the hospital, the idea came to my mind to give up the painkiller so that it would not become addictive later. For the first 2 or 3 days, everything was fine. As long as I didn't move, the pain didn't bother me much. Then the pain began to torment me at night, which is why I slept mostly during the day. This is where it all started. At night, I heard footsteps. Quiet, slow, and rustling, they headed towards my room. I held my breath, looked at the door, and again felt severe pain. I was lying with my head towards the door, so I turned my head, which is why it hurt. The steps were getting closer, and the closer they were, the more scared I was. But then the door opened slightly, and the nurse on duty looked in to check if everyone was asleep. My heart was relieved. I used to sleep at night, so I didn't know that she was doing night rounds. I calmed down and continued to lie down. Here again, footsteps and the rumble of the cart were heard. I thought that they had brought a sick person and fell asleep. In the morning, I found out that no one arrived at night. Well, I thought, you never know what the duty officer could carry at night. Again, night. Again, footsteps. Again, the duty officer. When the attendant comes in, you have to close your eyes and pretend that you are sleeping. Otherwise, you will be immediately given a sedative injection, after which your head will split. And then the roar of the gurney was heard. There were 3 people in our room at that time, and one bed was empty, so they could throw a patient in with us. The gurney rumbled closer and closer, and then I got really scared. The clicking of heels could be heard over the sound of the gurney. I would run away if I could. The gurney rumbled and the heels clicked, and then everything became quiet. Suddenly the door opened and a gurney rolled into the room. I closed my eyes and pretended to be asleep, but the gurney stopped between mine and the next bed. The clicking sound came closer to me, and I felt someone's breath on my face. Something touched my hand and I barely trembled. "You're not sleeping," the voice spoke in a whisper, but there was a feeling that it consisted of voices and sounds, among which were screams of horror and sobs. I know. What touched my hand now touched my shoulder, and then my face. I pretended to be asleep until the last moment, and this probably saved my life. The bed opposite me creaked. My neighbor apparently woke up. "Hey, who are you?" That's all he managed to say. The clicking sound moved towards him. The sound of a falling body was heard, and after a couple of minutes the gurney left the room. I seemed to have lost consciousness, or to have instantly fallen asleep due to nervous shock. In the morning, my neighbor was found dead, and I moved to another ward. Then I also heard the sound of the gurney at night about twice a week. She drove past my room, and every time I cringed, begging her not to come see me. The story is very strange. Happened to me in the hospital, where I was lying with a slight concussion. The doctor said that there was nothing to worry about and that I would be discharged soon. I was so tired from all the household chores that the hospital was like a resort for me. There is TV, food, and the nurses are all so friendly. There is always something to chat about. The hospital is good and clean. But then one incident happened. Let me tell you how it happened. As always, I went to the common kitchen, helped myself to some pasta I generally love to eat, and brought it to my room. I put it on the table, and then I felt the urge. What to do? I had to leave lunch and go to the end of the corridor. About 5 minutes later, I returned. I look, and the plate is empty, all licked, not a single piece of pasta. I already opened my mouth. Of course, I didn't find anything mystical in this. She went out into the corridor, looked around. No one was there. The nurses have their own lunch. They don't care about my pasta. So, walking along the corridor, I returned to the room. But you want to eat, although it's somehow inconvenient to take a second helping, but you don't want to stay hungry because of this. Armed with a fork and plate, I went to the cook. Nice, elderly woman. "Oh, have you already eaten everything?" She smiled when she saw me with a plate. "It seems that it's not me. Didn't you see that no one came into my room?" "Yes, I guess not." With these words, she plopped me another portion of pasta. I came into the room, put the plate down, and realized that I had forgotten the compote. Very dissatisfied, I went back. When I returned, I was stunned. The pasta was gone again. I was beside myself. I should have left them again. I realized that I am a complete idiot. I no longer wanted to go for a third serving, and I decided to see what would happen if I left the compote. I was sure that someone was brazenly stealing food from me. I went out into the hall and began to watch the windows of the balcony. The building with the hall faces forward, and from its windows, you can clearly see all the doors of both chambers and balconies. After all, the balconies are transparent, and the windows in the hall are almost the entire wall. Thus, I saw everyone who entered and left my room. I sat down on the sofa and began to watch. The compote stood peacefully on my table. After sitting there for about 10 minutes, I had already lost hope of identifying the thief, but then suddenly, a terrible-looking ant came around the corner from the side of the balcony. Large, looking like an old woman. The face looked around warily. In her hand, she had a fork with a plate. I no longer doubted that she was stealing my lunches. I decided to watch.